I'm going to be talking to Laura Presley, and she's an analyst with Statistics Canada. And we're going to be talking about a publication that came out in June called Recent Changes in Canadian Resident Travel to the United States. Basically, that's a statistician's way of saying travel is really down from Canada to the United States. We'll talk about why. Laura, welcome to the interview.
Thank you, Markham. Thank you for having me.
It's always good to talk data, right? Because there's a lot of chatter about this on social media and in the news media and so on. Give us an overview of your paper, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so with the changes in travel that we've been seeing, we really wanted a chance to kind of get into the data a little bit more deeply. And so most of the article was focused on changes that we've seen from about January until June on travel by automobile to the United States by Canadian residents. So really we're seeing a decline starting in January that kind of solidified in February up until June. And I know that now we're kind of beyond that time. We're getting into our August data that was just released, and we're seeing that those trends have continued into the August period as well.
So let's talk about a little bit of context for our viewers. 75% of trips from Canada to the US are by car. And you saw in the first since February to May, 5 straight months of year-over-year declines in 2025, right? What's the magnitude of those declines?
I mean, it's quite a bit. Like the travel to the US is the most major part of Canadian resident travel abroad. And so any decline in that is notable for economic reasons and also just for the travel habits of Canadians. So right up until I think in August, we are seeing that has continued as well. And so travel by Canadian residents to the US has dropped again. And it's just continuing to drop as we go on.
In your study, same day trips down 40.3%, overnight down 34.3%, based on the data you've got from August. And we understand this is a trend, and Stats can, well, I don't know what the word, verifies the data a little later down the road. So what kind of percentages are we talking about in August?
Let me just grab that. So for August, when we're looking at same day year-over-year change, when I say year-over-year too, we always compare one period to the same one the previous year, just so that we're kind of comparing apples to apples there. So looking at same day changes or same day travel to the US in August, that actually accounted for 61.6% of all our travel to the States in August. And that was down, if I'm looking at August, that's down 32.4% year over year. Overnight is down 35.6%. And so it's kind of, we're seeing both on the overnight and on the same day side that it has decreased once again. And that's kind of, we're seeing around that range for the last few months. So it has been relatively consistent there.
Now, you make a point in your paper that it's a little too early yet to say whether this is a part of a long-term trend or this is a short-term blip. But now we're 8 months into this, and I suppose policy changes could make a change. Politics could change, and we could go back to the way it is. At what point do we say, this looks like it's more permanent? Is it a year, 2 years, 5 years? What's the timeline?
That's a very good question. And I think even just recent events have changed how we think about that, because previous to COVID, travel trends were kind of constantly evolving. You had some blips, such as like the September 11th attack in New York City that impacted travel. You had the ice storm in 1998 impacting travel, things like that are a little bit more short term, but did have an impact. But then when you have COVID and the impact of the pandemic on travel, that was a 2-3 year period. And so like the way that we think about things has shifted as a result of the pandemic. And so for us now, looking at something that's an 8-month trend, we can't speak to whether that will continue in the future, but it is notable in terms of what we were seeing before and how even that is it's a little bit longer than some of the trends that we've seen in the past.
It's interesting how the data varies by province as well. Quebec 52.5%, BC 52.3%, Ontario 33.7%. What about some of the other provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the Maritimes? What do those numbers look like?
I'm just pulling it up for August now, and we're seeing it's like Ontario's minus 28.9%. Looking at BC, it's a little bit higher. You've got 37.3 as a negative year over year. Quebec even higher than that at 44%. Um, Unfortunately, in our data that we use, it's administrative data. And so we aren't able to differentiate between people who are traveling for business or for pleasure, which is unfortunate because we know that some industries have more cross border travel than others, but unfortunately aren't able to get into that in the data itself. Um, we have seen in the past that Alberta has kind of bucked the trend a little bit in terms of cross border travels. Um, but yeah, we can't unfortunately say as to why that's happening in one province versus another.
Fair enough. Let's talk about air travel, which counts for about 19% of U.S. trips overnight. What can you tell us about that?
So, yeah, Canadian resident trips to the US by air have been declining since about September 2023 and continue to do so. One thing we will note there is that we noticed that travel by car has been impacted much more than travel by air. We don't know if that, like the precise reason behind that. We have an inclination to just believe that part of it is that air travel is much more expensive. And so it's more difficult to change those plans. You also have to go through a booking system to be able to do it, whereas travel by auto offers a little bit more flexibility. And so we have seen a little bit more changes in trips by auto than by air. I think in general, trips by air have not been impacted in the same magnitude as what we're seeing with trips by auto. I think trips by auto, looking at our leading indicator for the month of August, we're seeing that Canadian resident return trips by auto were down 33.9%. Whereas if you're looking at Canadian resident trips by air, it's only down 4.1% in general. So you're just seeing that it's a little bit of a different story for air versus auto.
Given that it's different for air versus auto, then can we assume that overseas trips have not fallen at all? Maybe they've even increased?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So if I'm bringing up our recent stuff, I wish I could show you the chart that's on my screen because it's a good one here. But if we're looking at Canadian residents returning from the US by air, I'm just looking at the July data, which just came out today. This is our more comprehensive travel between Canada and other countries. Canadian residents returning from the US by air was down 16.2%. Canadian residents returning from the US by automobile was down 35.8%. And then if you compare that to Canadians returning from overseas by air, that one's actually up 8.9%. And that one has been consistently in the positives, where we're like seeing travel overseas has been consistently in the positives, whereas you're seeing travel from the US is consistently in the negatives. So it's kind of a little bit of an interesting reflection there.
Well, Laura, thank you very much for this. Very interesting data, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Markham.